My name is Claire Anderson, and I'm 45 years old. At my father's 70th birthday party, in front of his business partners, he held the antique brass compass I'd spent months restoring for him, and said, "This toy, thanks, but I think it belongs in the trash." They had no idea that compass had once saved a billionaire's life, and now it was about to point my way to taking back everything. Driving my old Ford F-150 into their pristine Palo Alto neighborhood, I'd allowed a stupid, fragile flicker of hope to ignite. But his words sliced through the clinking of champagne glasses as he handed my soul, encased in brass, to the butler to be thrown away. The air vanished from my lungs, my face burned hot, but a chilling cold seeped deep into my bones. I just stood there, mute, watching my own worth get discarded with the trash. Have you ever given your whole heart only to watch it get tossed aside? Tell me in the comments and follow, because you are going to want to witness the fire they thought was out roar back to life. That cold, heavy silence in my chest was familiar. It was the same silence that filled the cab of my old Ford F-150 as I drove down from the Santa Cruz Mountains, leaving behind the scent of pine and damp earth for the sterile, manicured air of Palo Alto. The driveway, a gleaming testament to minimalist architecture, was lined with Teslas and Porsches, each one whispering a language of stock options and success I'd never learned to speak. I felt like an intruder in my own past, clutching the hand-carved walnut box like a shield. Inside it rested a World War II-era brass compass, a piece of history I had hunted for months and painstakingly restored, its needle once pointing soldiers home from a world on fire. I told myself, just for tonight, maybe this time would be different. A fool's hope. My mother, Eleanor, drifted past me, a specter in a silk dress, her scent of Tom Ford perfume a suffocating cloud. She didn't hug me, she never did. Instead, her eyes did a quick, brutal inventory of my simple dress, my worn leather boots, my hair pulled back in a practical knot. "You could have at least tried to do something with your hair, Claire," she'd whispered, her voice a perfectly sharpened icicle, before gliding away to greet the wife of some tech CEO. I stood there, a ghost in their grand glass house, watching my brother, Ethan, hold court. He was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets orbiting his brilliance. In his tailored Xenia suit, he looked every bit the vice president of Nexus Corp, the golden child, the future. Then came the moment for gifts. My stomach twisted. Ethan presented his offering first, a Patek Philippe watch, its face gleaming under the recessed lighting. My father, Richard, let out a triumphant laugh that echoed off the cold marble floors. "Now this is a son," he boomed, holding the watch aloft for everyone to admire. "He always knows what his old man needs." He pulled Ethan into a hearty, backslapping hug. The room erupted in applause. I saw the pride in my father's eyes, a look I had spent a lifetime chasing and never once caught. I was invisible, a smudge on the pristine glass of their perfect family portrait. When the applause died down, all eyes turned to me. My hands trembled as I stepped forward and gave my father the walnut box. "Happy birthday, Dad," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. He opened it, his expression shifting from curiosity to a flat, bored disdain as he picked up the compass. He turned it over in his hands, his touch almost insulting. "This toy?" he asked, his voice loud enough for the silence to carry it to every corner of the room. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "What's it for? To find my way out of the backyard?" A few of his partners chuckled politely. I saw a smirk flicker across Ethan's face. Then my father looked past me, toward the butler. "Carlos," he said, his tone dripping with contempt, "would you mind throwing this in the trash? It's getting my hands dirty." The air vanished from my lungs. My face burned hot, but a chilling cold seeped deep into my bones. I watched Carlos, his own face a mask of discomfort, take the compass and walk toward the bin. I saw it disappear among the discarded napkins and empty champagne bottles. I just stood there, mute, watching my own worth get discarded with the trash. The compass, with its silent, steady needle, now lay buried. It reminded me of another promise, another piece of my heart that was tossed aside just as carelessly, beneath an old oak tree in that very backyard. Have you ever given your whole heart only to watch it get tossed aside? Tell me in the comments and follow, because you are going to want to witness the fire they thought was out roar back to life. The cold brass of the compass, discarded in the trash, felt like a physical weight in my memory. It wasn't just a compass, it was a promise. And it reminded me of another promise, one made of sunshine and youthful hope, that was shattered just as brutally beneath an old oak tree in that very backyard. I remember my high school graduation. It was a sweltering June day in Palo Alto. I was the valedictorian, the one chosen to give the speech, the girl with a string of academic awards that barely fit on the program. But as I stood on that stage, squinting into the crowd, the 2 seats reserved for my parents were empty. They arrived 20 minutes late, flushed and flustered, slipping in just as I was finishing my speech. The reason? They'd been driving Ethan, then a 14-year-old prodigy, to a statewide science fair. His project, a rudimentary robotic arm, was apparently more important than his sister's crowning academic achievement. Later that evening, there was no celebratory dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. There was no cake. There was just leftover casserole and a house buzzing with talk of Ethan's project. My father paced the living room on the phone with one of his colleagues, boasting about Ethan's ingenuity. "The boy's a genius, I tell you, a true innovator." In the only family photo from that day, my smile is a tight, brittle thing. I'm holding my diploma like it's a shield, while my parents are both glancing at their watches, their minds already elsewhere. The only acknowledgement I received from my mother was a brisk pat on the shoulder. "Well done, dear," she'd said, her voice devoid of any real warmth. "At least you got into a state university. That's practical." Practical. That was the best word she could find for my 4 years of straight A's. My success wasn't a cause for celebration. It was merely a satisfactory, low-cost outcome. But the memory that truly carved out a hollow space inside me, the one that the compass in the trash bin resurrected with such violent clarity, was the promise of the Jeep. It was the spring of my senior year. My father, in a rare moment of what I mistook for affection, sat with me under the sprawling branches of the old oak tree in our backyard. He knew how much I loved the wild, untamed forests of the Pacific Northwest, how I dreamed of escaping the manicured lawns of Silicon Valley. "Claire," he'd said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, "if you get a full scholarship to the University of Oregon, I'll buy you that old Jeep Wrangler you've been eyeing, so you can have your freedom, explore those forests of yours." That promise became my fuel. I studied until my eyes burned. I wrote essays until my fingers cramped. I gave up weekends, parties, everything. I wasn't just studying for a scholarship, I was studying for his approval, for that tangible proof of my worth, and I did it. The acceptance letter arrived on a bright April afternoon, a thick, promising envelope. Full scholarship. I ran, letter in hand, to find my father in his home office, my heart pounding with a desperate childish joy. "I did it, Dad. I got it." He took the letter, his eyes scanning it quickly. For a fleeting second, I saw something flicker in his expression. Pride, maybe? But it vanished as quickly as it came. He placed the letter neatly on his desk. "Good," he said, his voice once again, the cool, measured tone of a businessman. "That's good, Claire." He paused, steepling his fingers. "But Ethan just won the National Robotics Competition. It's a huge deal. I think that money for the Jeep would be better spent building him a proper lab in the garage. He's the future of this family, you understand? It's a strategic investment." He didn't even look at me when he delivered the final crushing blow. "You can take the bus, can't you?" I don't remember walking away. I just remember finding myself back under the oak tree, the rough bark pressing against my back. The world went blurry. I sat there and cried until the sun went down and the sky turned a bruised purple. I wasn't crying for a car. I was crying for the broken promise. I was crying for the gut-wrenching, soul-crushing realization that no matter what I did, no matter how high I climbed, I would always be secondary. My achievements were disposable. My dreams were negotiable. Their love wasn't a gift. It was an investment portfolio. Ethan was their blue-chip stock, destined for greatness. And I was a bad stock, a sentimental write-off. That night, beneath the silent branches of the oak tree, I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. I was utterly and completely alone. That knowledge followed me into my first years of college. The final memory that cemented it all was from my sophomore year. I was working 2 jobs to pay for my first EMT certification courses, a greasy spoon diner where I came home smelling of fried onions, and a late-night shift at a 7-Eleven. I was thin, exhausted, with permanent dark circles under my eyes. One weekend, I came home for a visit. Ethan, home from his prestigious prep school, threw his expensive JanSport backpack on the floor and sighed dramatically. "I'm so sick of these Nikes," he whined, pointing at his barely worn sneakers. "They're not cool anymore." Without a word, my mother opened her purse and handed him a crisp $100 bill. "Go buy yourself a new pair, sweetie." I stood in the doorway, my hands raw and chapped from the diner's dishwater. I could still smell the grease on my clothes. I looked at the effortless way he received what I had to bleed for. The injustice of it all, the sheer, unadulterated unfairness, rose in my throat like bile. Their love wasn't a gift, it was an investment portfolio. And I was a bad stock they were ready to write off. If their love was an investment, then why shouldn't I finally invest in myself? That question echoed in my mind, a relentless drumbeat against the hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't a question born of anger, but of a sudden, chilling clarity. That night, after my shift at the 7-Eleven, I didn't go back to my dorm. I went to my small, shared apartment, pulled out an old military-style duffel bag, and started packing. I didn't leave a note. I didn't make a single phone call. Words were useless. They were the currency of their world, a world of broken promises and hollow praise. My world would be built on action. With a few changes of clothes, my worn hiking boots, and the few $100 I had saved stuffed into my pocket, I got into my rattling Toyota Corolla and drove. I drove north for 10 straight hours, fueled by black coffee and a fierce, desperate need to disappear. I drove until the perfectly symmetrical suburbs of Silicon Valley melted away into the rugged, pine-scented wilderness of Oregon. I was driving toward the forests that had always called to me, the only place I ever felt truly small, in a way that was comforting, not belittling. I found my way to a recruitment office in Redding. I didn't apply to be a park ranger or a guide. I applied for the one thing that seemed the most impossible, the most brutal, the most definitive break from my past. I applied to become a smoke jumper, one of the most elite, physically demanding, and dangerous firefighting jobs in the world. It was my final act of rebellion, a silent scream that said, I'm going to a place where my worth is measured by courage, not by stock prices. The training camp was hell on earth, designed to break you. And I was one of only 3 women in a class of 50. The men, with their hardened, cynical eyes, looked at me and saw a joke. They saw my uncalloused hands, my slender frame, and my college background, and they nicknamed me Princess Palo Alto. The instructors ran us until we puked. We had to carry a 110-pound pack of gear up and down mountainsides, the straps digging into our shoulders until they were raw. We learned to read the wind, to anticipate the fire's hunger, to pack a parachute that our lives would depend on. Every morning, my body screamed in protest. Every muscle ached with a deep, relentless pain. There were nights I'd collapse onto my bunk, too tired to even take off my boots, my mind a numb fog of exhaustion. But I gritted my teeth and endured. Every drop of sweat that stung my eyes, every gash from a rogue branch, every time I pushed myself past the point of collapse was a silent affirmation. I am not weak, I am not a toy, I am not disposable. I'll never forget my first jump. The roar of the airplane's engine, the sharp smell of fuel, the lurch in my stomach as the jump master yelled, "Go!" below me was not earth, but a churning, roaring sea of fire. For a terrifying second, falling through the sky, I thought of my father's dismissive laugh. Then my boots hit the ground with a solid thud. I was surrounded by the deafening roar of a crown fire. The heat so intense it felt like a physical blow, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning pine. And in that moment I felt no fear. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. This was a world of brutal honesty. The fire didn't care about my last name, my family's wealth, or my brother's achievements. Here, survival was the only currency. Here, you were judged by your actions, by your grit, by your willingness to walk toward the flames while others ran away. I had finally found my home. For 10 years, that sky, thick with smoke and ash, was my cathedral. The roar of the fire was my hymn. And then came the Eagle Creek fire. It was a monster, a firestorm that moved with unnatural speed, devouring ancient forests in its path. Our unit was dropped into a canyon, tasked with creating a firebreak to protect a small, isolated community. But the wind shifted. In an instant, we were trapped. A giant Douglas fir, weakened by the flames, began to fall, its groan a death rattle. I saw it tilting toward a rookie, a kid no older than 20, his eyes wide with terror. I didn't think, I just moved. I shoved him out of the way, a violent, desperate push. I felt a searing white-hot pain as a massive, burning limb crashed down across my back and left arm. The pain was blinding, a clean, sharp agony that threatened to swallow me whole. My gear was on fire, but through the haze I could hear the rookie calling my name. I wasn't done. Then I saw him. Through the swirling smoke and embers, I saw a man, his leg pinned beneath a collapsed ranger outpost. The roof was about to go. Everyone was retreating. The order had been given to pull back. But I couldn't leave him. My training, my instincts, everything screamed at me to run. But a deeper voice, the voice I'd forged in this very fire, refused. Ignoring the fire consuming my own gear and the screams of my own body, I scrambled over the debris. The heat was blistering, the air a poison. I reached him, shielded his body with my own, as burning shingles rained down, and I pulled. I pulled with a strength I didn't know I possessed, a raw primal force born of sheer will. We broke free just as the entire structure imploded behind us, a final furious roar. I dragged him to the edge of the clearing and collapsed. The last thing I remember was the face of the man I'd saved, looking down at me, his mouth moving but no sound coming out. Those scars, the ones that snake across my back and arm, they never fully healed. They are a raised, jagged map of that day. They were a price I paid willingly. But as I traced their lines in the quiet of my small apartment years later, a question still echoed. Does a sacrifice no one sees still have value? Does a sacrifice no one sees still have value? That question became a quiet, constant companion in the years after I left the smoke jumpers. I never spoke of my past. I moved to Santa Cruz, a coastal town where people valued authenticity over assets, and I poured what was left of my spirit into founding the Phoenix Initiative, a small nonprofit for at-risk teens. I taught them wilderness survival, not as a fun camping trip, but as a way to find their own resilience. Most days the quiet work was enough, but sometimes in the dead of night, the question would return, a ghost in the salt-laced air. The answer came on a foggy Tuesday afternoon. I was giving a free fire safety workshop at the local community library. The turnout was sparse, a few worried-looking parents, a handful of curious seniors, maybe a dozen people in total. I went through the motions, demonstrating how to use a fire extinguisher, explaining the importance of an escape plan. After the Q&A, as people began to drift away, one man remained. He was dressed simply in jeans and a dark, unassuming jacket, but he carried himself with an air of quiet authority. He waited patiently until everyone else had left, then approached me, his eyes a piercing shade of gray, holding a profound, unsettling reverence. "Miss Anderson," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "Claire Anderson?" I nodded, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. "My name is Julian Croft," he continued, and I saw his hand tremble slightly. You won't remember me, but I will never, ever forget your voice." The name didn't register, but his eyes, there was something in their depths. "Eagle Creek," he said, his voice cracking. "The fire, you pulled me out." And just like that, the world tilted on its axis. He was the man from the collapsed ranger outpost, the face I saw in my smoke-filled nightmares. I just stared, speechless. He didn't push for a grand reunion. He simply asked, "May I buy you a cup of coffee? I have wanted to thank you for a very long time." We walked to a small, no-frills cafe overlooking the ocean, the kind with mismatched ceramic mugs and the constant, soothing sound of the waves. It wasn't the sort of place my father would ever set foot in. We sat at a small table by the window, the fog outside, a thick white blanket. I was braced for the inevitable questions, the prying into my past, but they never came. He didn't ask me why I'd left the service. He didn't ask about my family or my life before the fire. Instead, he looked at the raised silvery scars on my forearm, the ones my long sleeves usually concealed. His gaze was gentle, without a trace of pity. "Do they still hurt?" he asked. The simple, direct question disarmed me completely. I found myself telling him things I'd never told another soul. I told him about the nightmares, about the phantom smell of smoke that would wake me in a cold sweat. I told him about the survivor's guilt, the heavy, unshakable feeling for the teammates who didn't make it out that day. He just listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He just listened, his gray eyes fixed on mine. And in his silence, I felt more understood than I had in a lifetime of my family's loud, empty words. When I finished, my voice hoarse, he nodded slowly. "You carried the weight of that entire mountain out of the fire with you, Claire," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No one on this earth has the right to judge how you chose to set it down." Then he told me something that made my head spin. He explained that his private foundation had quietly awarded me a $500,000 grant after the incident, a silent thank you. "I know you never touched it," he said with a small, knowing smile. "People like you don't do what you do for money." He leaned forward slightly, the intensity in his eyes softening. "I've been following your work here, the Phoenix Initiative." My heart sank, expecting the familiar dismissal. But what he said next changed everything. "My father would call it glorified camping," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Julian shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "It's not camping, it's healing. It's giving these kids the tools to save themselves. What you're doing here, it's a different kind of firefighting, Claire. And if you'll let me, I want to help. Not as an investor, as someone who owes you a debt I can never fully repay." For the first time, someone saw my life's work not as a hobby, but as a mission. As we stood to leave, he handed me a simple, elegant business card with only his name and a private number. "If you ever need anything," he said, and his gaze was so sincere, it was almost painful to meet. And I mean anything, someone to talk to, or even just someone to sit in silence with, "you call me." He paused, then added the words that would undo me. "Sometimes, Claire, the family we choose matters more than the one we're born into." That was it. The dam I had built around my heart for decades finally broke. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow, it was a tear of pure, unadulterated relief. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen. And that feeling, that simple, powerful feeling, began to mend cracks I didn't even know were still there. That feeling of being seen, of being valued, was a fragile warmth I hadn't realized I was starving for. For a few weeks, I allowed myself to bask in it. Julian became a quiet, steady presence in my life, a mentor and a friend. The Phoenix Initiative received its first major grant from his foundation, and for the first time, I could afford proper equipment for the kids, and even hire a part-time assistant. The cracks in my soul, as I told him, had begun to mend. And then the phone rang. It was a number I knew by heart, but hadn't seen in years. My mother. Her voice dripped with a sweetness so unnatural it set my teeth on edge. "Claire, darling, how are you? We all miss you terribly." I remained silent, my hand tightening on the phone. She launched into the reason for her call, her tone bubbling with manufactured excitement. Ethan was being honored at the annual Nexus Foundation Gala in San Francisco, a major event for his contributions to the tech industry. "Everyone who's anyone will be there, Claire. Your father and I would be so thrilled if you would join us. It's so important that we present a united family front." She paused, then delivered the subtle, familiar sting. "And do wear something nice, dear, something elegant." The unspoken message was clear. Don't embarrass us. A part of me, the cynical, scarred part, wanted to say no, to hang up and block her number forever. But another part, the stupid, hopeful child inside, who refused to die, whispered, "What if this is it? What if they've finally changed?" The thought was a dangerous temptation. I called the one person I could trust for a clear perspective. Julian listened patiently to my conflicted thoughts. "You don't owe them your presence, Claire," he said gently. "But perhaps you owe it to yourself to go. Not for them, for you." to show them, and more importantly, to show yourself that you are not the same woman who left their house all those years ago. His words gave me the strength I needed. I decided to go. I didn't buy a new dress. Instead, I chose a simple, well-tailored navy blue pantsuit. It wasn't elegant, it was armor. The night before the gala, my family insisted on a reunion dinner at the House of Prime Rib in San Francisco. The air in the iconic wood-paneled restaurant was thick with the smell of roasting meat and old money. The atmosphere at our table, however, was thick with tension. My father, Richard, held forth, his voice full of pride. "This is a massive milestone for Ethan, for the family." He took a long sip of his Cabernet. "I hear Julian Croft himself will be there. Ethan tells me the man is a legend, notoriously hard to impress. We all need to be on our best behavior." He then fixed his gaze on me, his eyes cold and commanding. "Claire, tomorrow night, your job is to sit still and smile. That's it. No talk of your wilderness projects, no stories about fires or dirt. No one is interested in that." His words were a familiar, cold weight in my stomach, but I was prepared for them. I nodded silently, refusing to give him the satisfaction of an argument. The real shock, the one that felt like a physical blow, came later. While my parents were admiring the dessert cart, Ethan leaned across the table, his handsome face a mask of calculated charm, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "So listen, Claire, I heard a rumor that you know Julian Croft." My blood ran cold. He didn't even wait for my confirmation. "Here's the deal. Tomorrow night, I need you to make an introduction, a casual one. Tell him about my new AI project, how it's going to revolutionize data security. You know, just talk me up." He smiled, a flash of white teeth that didn't reach his eyes. "Think of it as your way of finally contributing to the family after all these years." And there it was. The curtain was pulled back, revealing the ugly, cynical machinery behind the stage play. The syrupy phone call, the forced reunion dinner, the feigned interest. It was all a lie. A meticulously crafted performance for a single purpose. I wasn't an invited daughter. I was a networking tool. I wasn't family. I was a bridge to be crossed and then forgotten. My connection to Julian Croft was the only part of me they suddenly found valuable. I looked at my brother, at his entitled, expectant face, and I felt nothing but a profound, hollow emptiness. The hope I had foolishly allowed to flicker was extinguished, leaving behind only the cold, hard ash of betrayal. I excused myself from the table, my composure a thin, brittle shell. In the sterile, white-tiled restroom, I stared at my own reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was no longer a lost girl hoping for a crumb of affection. Her eyes were not filled with tears, but with a glacial, newfound clarity. They wanted a show? Fine. I'll give them a performance they will never forget. They wanted a show. I walked into the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, ready to give them one. The air hummed with the low murmur of power and money, a symphony of clinking glasses and hushed deals. Towering floral arrangements scented the air, almost masking the metallic tang of ambition. I wasn't wearing armor. My navy blue pantsuit felt less like protection and more like a uniform, my own uniform, for a battle I had finally chosen to fight. I didn't hide in the corner, as the old Claire would have. I kept my back straight, my chin up, and my gaze steady. I saw them immediately. My family, seated at a VIP table near the stage, a perfect portrait of success. My father, laughing a little too loudly at something a colleague said. My mother, smiling her tight, practiced smile. and Ethan, the man of the hour, looking polished and confident. He caught my eye and gave a subtle, impatient jerk of his head, a silent command for me to come over. I met his gaze for a barest second, then deliberately turned my back on him and walked toward the bar. A small act of rebellion, but it felt like a seismic shift inside me. I ordered a club soda with lime, the cold glass a steadying presence in my hand. "You look like a woman with a purpose, Claire." The voice was calm and familiar. I turned to see Julian Croft standing beside me, a warm, genuine smile on his face. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo like the other titans of industry, just a beautifully cut dark suit. "I'm so glad you came," he said. "It means a great deal to me." Our conversation was easy, flowing from my work with the teens to his latest philanthropic project. But I was acutely aware of the eyes on us. From across the room, I could feel the heat of my family's baffled, furious stares. Ethan's confident facade was cracking. I saw him start to move toward us, a nervous energy in his step. He approached our small circle, a fake smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Croft, a pleasure. I'm Ethan Anderson." Julian turned, gave him a polite but brief nod, and said, "Mr. Anderson." Then, without missing a beat, he turned his full attention back to me, effectively dismissing my brother as if he were a junior intern. The public slight was masterfully executed. Ethan was livid. He grabbed my elbow a few moments later, pulling me toward a shadowed alcove. The mask of charm had vanished, replaced by a raw, petulant anger. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, his grip tightening. "That was your cue. Why didn't you introduce me? This is my night, my one chance." I looked at his hand on my arm, then slowly raised my eyes to meet his. My voice, when it came, was as cold and clear as ice. "Your chance to what, Ethan? To build your future on a foundation of lies? Or on the sacrifices of someone you've spent your entire life looking down on?" His face went slack with shock. He had no answer. That was the moment the music softened, and the CEO of Nexus Corp stepped up to the podium. After a few opening remarks, he introduced the evening's special guest speaker, Julian Croft. As Julian walked to the stage, he gave me a small, reassuring nod. He began with the expected pleasantries, thanking the donors and praising the innovators. Then he paused, his gaze sweeping the room, before it landed with unwavering precision right on me. "Tonight, we celebrate innovation," he began, his voice commanding the silence of the room. "But sometimes the greatest courage isn't in creating something new, but in saving something precious." The room was utterly still. Years ago, in the Eagle Creek fire, I was certain I was going to die. But through the smoke and the roar, I heard a voice yell, "Don't give up." That voice belonged to a hero, a smoke jumper. He took a breath, letting the tension build. "That woman is here with us tonight. Her name is Claire Anderson." A collective, soft gasp rippled through the ballroom. I could feel hundreds of eyes turning toward me. I didn't look at my family, but I could feel their shock, like a physical force. Julian wasn't finished. For that act of incredible bravery, Claire was awarded the Presidential Medal of Valor, and from my own foundation, a private grant of $500,000. He raised his glass. "Please join me in a toast to a true American hero." The applause was thunderous. I saw the flash of cameras. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Julian had made his way back to me. But I looked past him just for a second at my family's table. Ethan's face was ashen, a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. My mother had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. My father, My father simply looked old and small and utterly defeated. In that moment, I wasn't Ethan's failed older sister. I wasn't my parents' disappointing daughter. I was Claire Anderson, and the shadow I had lived in my entire life had just been vaporized by the blinding light of the truth. The performance was over. The old me would have shrunk from the attention, but this new version of myself simply stood tall and gave a single, dignified nod to the room. I had found my voice. We all have a moment where the silence becomes unbearable, a breaking point where we decide we will no longer be ignored. Tell me about the time you found your voice and stood up for yourself. Every story of courage is a spark that can light a fire in someone else. The performance was over. As I walked away from the gala, leaving my family frozen in the spotlight of their own public humiliation, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a strange, cold calm. I was naive to think that was the end. For people like them, humiliation isn't a lesson, it's a declaration of war. The first salvo was fired 3 days later. Julian sent me the link with a simple message: brace yourself. It was a blog post on a major Silicon Valley tech site, the Silicon Beat. The headline felt like a punch to the gut. Hero or hypocrite? My sister, the Eagle Creek ghost, sits on $500,000 while her brother struggles. The article was written anonymously, from the perspective of a heartbroken younger brother. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. It painted me as a cold, selfish hoarder of wealth, a woman who callously refused to help her brilliant, struggling brother achieve his world-changing dream. It twisted my quiet life in Santa Cruz into a sign of indolence. My work with at-risk teens, a quaint, meaningless hobby. And then came the lines that made my blood run cold. The post vaguely mentioned my struggles with mental stability after leaving the smoke jumpers, hinting at a deep-seated trauma that made me unreliable and prone to irrational decisions. The post went viral. It was shared across LinkedIn, Twitter, and private tech forums. My quiet, carefully constructed world imploded. The calls started first. A major donor for the Phoenix Initiative, a kind woman from a local family foundation, called to express her deep concern. Her tone was polite, but the message was clear. Our funding was on hold. Then came the emails from parents, worried about the negative influence on their children. 3 teens were pulled from my program within 24 hours. A reporter from a sleazy tabloid started camping out in a car across the street from my small apartment, his long-lensed camera a constant predatory eye. The anonymous comments online were a torrent of venom. Gold digger, cold-hearted bitch, fake hero. Each word was a digital stone, and I felt like I was being stoned to death in a public square. I stopped answering my phone. I stopped checking my email. I felt the walls of my own home closing in on me. The deepest cut, the one that severed the last, thinnest thread of hope I had for my family, came from my mother. She called, and foolishly I answered. There was no sympathy in her voice, only a cold, sharp fury. "Are you happy now, Claire?" she began, her voice trembling with rage. "Look what you've done. You've ruined this family with your arrogance. Because of you, Ethan is being scrutinized. His reputation is in tatters. Do you have any idea the kind of pressure he's under? But you wouldn't know. You only ever think about yourself." I was speechless, the sheer audacity of her blame, stealing the air from my lungs. But she wasn't done. "I told him you weren't well," she spat, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was more terrifying than her yelling. "I told him about your panic attacks, about the nightmares, the nights I had to talk you down over the phone. I told him because he was worried. He was just trying to protect his investors from your instability. I dropped the phone. The clatter of it hitting the floor barely registered. My own mother, the one person I had confided in during my darkest moments, the person who had heard my choked sobs and my fears of the smoke that still haunted my dreams. She had taken my vulnerability, my pain, and handed it to my brother as a weapon. It was the ultimate betrayal, a betrayal so profound it felt like a part of my soul had been surgically removed without anesthesia. The final straw came that Friday night. I came home late from a long, draining day of damage control to find my front window shattered. Glass crunched under my boots, my heart hammered against my ribs as I cautiously stepped inside. My small living room was a mess, drawers pulled out, papers scattered. But they hadn't taken my TV or the little cash I kept in a jar. They had gone straight for one thing. My laptop, the one containing all the files for the Phoenix Initiative, donor lists, program schedules, the kids' progress reports, was lying on the floor, its screen a spiderweb of cracks. And resting on top of the shattered screen was a single piece of paper, a note printed in stark block letters. Those who don't share lose everything. It wasn't a robbery, it was a threat, a clear, calculated message. The initial shock gave way to a fear so cold and primal it reminded me of being trapped in the canyon fire. But this time, the fire wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from my own blood. My fear evaporated, replaced by something cold and hard as steel. They had crossed the final line. They hadn't just attacked me, they had attacked the kids, the one pure thing I had built from the ashes of my old life. I picked up my phone, my hand no longer shaking, and dialed the only number I knew I could trust. When he answered, my voice was steady. "Julian," I said, "I need your help. It's time to fight back." "Julian," I said, my voice steady, "I need your help. It's time to fight back." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then his voice, calm and cold as steel. "I'll be there in 2 hours." He didn't come alone. The next morning, I wasn't sitting in a cozy cafe. I was in a sterile, soundproof conference room in a downtown San Francisco high-rise. Julian sat across from me, and on either side of him were the people he called his team. There was a man named Marcus, a former FBI agent turned private investigator with eyes that missed nothing, and a woman named Anya, a digital forensics expert, whose fingers flew across her keyboard with terrifying speed. Leading them was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her late 40s named Evelyn Miller, one of the most feared corporate litigators in the state. This was not a support group. This was a war council. Julian looked at me, his expression grim. "They declared war on one of my own, Claire," he said, his voice low and intense, "and we are going to finish it." The anger that had been simmering inside me was replaced by a cold, focused calm. For the next few days, I watched them work. It was a masterclass in controlled demolition. Anya, the forensics expert, was the first to strike. With a few keystrokes and a warrant, she bypassed Nexus Corp's firewalls. "Got it," she said quietly after a few hours of intense typing. The IP address of the anonymous blog post on the Silicon Beat was traced directly to a desktop computer in Ethan's corner office. But that was just the beginning. She began pulling data from the servers, recovering deleted emails, and archived Slack messages. The screen in the conference room lit up with my brother's digital trail of deceit. There were emails to a handful of tech bloggers, complete with wire transfer receipts. He hadn't just written the post, he had paid to have it amplified. A coordinated smear campaign. While Anya dismantled his digital life, Marcus, the PI, worked in the physical world. He was discreet, a ghost who gathered whispers and facts. He spoke to former Nexus employees, disillusioned investors, and even the caterers from the gala. A darker picture began to emerge. The struggling startup Ethan claimed to be running didn't exist. It was a shell corporation. Marcus uncovered a series of falsified invoices from this shell company to Nexus Corp, approved by Ethan himself. My brother wasn't just in financial trouble, he was actively embezzling money from his own company. The hundreds of thousands he'd stolen weren't for a revolutionary new app. They were funneled into a failing cryptocurrency portfolio and used to fund the lavish lifestyle he flaunted on Instagram. The luxury car leases, the weekend trips to Vegas, the designer clothes. He wasn't just a liar, he was a common thief hiding behind a veneer of Silicon Valley genius. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place on the third day. Marcus's investigation led him to a low-level security contractor Ethan had hired for personal protection. The contractor, when faced with evidence of his own unrelated tax issues, quickly confessed. He was the one who broke into my apartment. He described how Ethan had given him a key, told him exactly which laptop to destroy, and even dictated the threatening note to leave on the screen. It was all there. Every suspicion, every fear I'd had was no longer a ghost haunting me. It was a cold, hard, verifiable fact. Evelyn Miller, the lawyer, compiled everything. She worked with a quiet, ruthless efficiency. The binder she placed on the polished conference table was 3 inches thick. It contained bank statements with highlighted fraudulent transfers, transcripts of recorded calls with investors Ethan had defrauded, sworn affidavits from former employees, and crystal-clear stills from the security camera in my apartment hallway, showing Ethan letting the contractor into the building on the night of the break-in. I stared at the binder, at the mountain of evidence that proved I wasn't crazy, that my pain was real. But I didn't feel the triumphant rush of vindication I had expected. Instead, a profound sadness washed over me. This wasn't just about my brother's crimes. It was about the hollowness of the world that had created him, a world that praised ambition over integrity and image over substance. He was a monster, but he was a monster my family's values had helped build. Ms. Miller slid the thick binder across the polished table toward me. "We have everything, Claire," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, libel. It's all here. Now the choice is yours. We can pursue a quiet settlement, or we can take this into the light and let the world see the truth." The choice Ms. Miller gave me wasn't really a choice at all. A quiet settlement would have been another form of silence, another betrayal to myself. "We take it into the light," I told her, my voice clear and steady. The Philip Burton Federal Building in San Francisco is an imposing, brutalist structure designed to make you feel small. But as I sat in the polished wooden chairs of the courtroom, I didn't feel small. I felt calm. I sat in the front row, flanked by Julian on one side and Evelyn Miller on the other. Across the aisle, my brother Ethan looked like a stranger. He was pale and gaunt in an ill-fitting suit, his usual arrogance replaced by a twitching, nervous energy. Behind him, my parents sat hunched and gray, looking older than I had ever seen them. They stared at the floor, at their hands, anywhere but at me. The back rows were filled with reporters, their pens scratching furiously in their notepads. This wasn't just a family drama anymore. It was a public reckoning. The prosecution, led by Ms. Miller, began methodically. There was no theatricality, just a cold, relentless presentation of facts. The digital trail of the smear campaign, the falsified invoices, the banking records showing the flow of embezzled money from Nexus Corp to Ethan's personal accounts. Each piece of evidence was projected onto the large screens in the courtroom. With each new slide, a low murmur would ripple through the gallery. I watched Ethan's composure crumble piece by piece. He stammered, he denied, he tried to deflect. But for every lie he told, Miss Miller had a document, a recording, or a witness to refute it. His empire of deceit, built over years, was being dismantled in a matter of hours. The most difficult part of the day was when my mother was called to the stand. I watched Eleanor, the woman who had taught me how to read, walk slowly toward the witness box. At first, she tried to defend him. Her voice was weak but defiant. He was under pressure, she said. The tech world was a cutthroat place. He made a mistake. She portrayed him as a victim of his own ambition. Miss Miller listened patiently, her expression unreadable. Then she approached the witness stand and placed a document on the evidence monitor. It was a printout of a text message exchange between Eleanor and Ethan, dated the day after the gala. "He is unstable," my mother had written. "You need to be careful. She has had panic attacks for years. Sometimes she can't sleep for days. Use this. It will make people understand." The courtroom was silent. My mother stared at the screen, her face ashen. Her carefully constructed defense had evaporated. "Mrs. Anderson," Ms. Miller's voice was quiet, but cut through the silence like a scalpel. "Did you provide your son with private medical information about your daughter to be used in a public smear campaign?" Eleanor looked up, her eyes swimming with tears, and for the first time that day, she looked at me. It wasn't a look of remorse. It was a look of accusation. "I just wanted to protect my son," she whispered, her voice breaking into a sob. "He's our future." The words hung in the air, a final damning confirmation of a lifetime of truths I had tried to ignore. She wasn't just choosing him over me, she was sacrificing me for him. When the time came for the sentencing, the judge turned to me. "Ms. Anderson, do you wish to make a victim impact statement?" I felt Julian's hand gently squeeze my shoulder. I stood up, my legs steady beneath me. I didn't look at the judge. I didn't look at Ethan. I looked directly at my parents. "Your Honor," I began, my voice echoing in the silent room. "I spent my entire life waiting for an apology, for a sign that I was seen, that I mattered." I saw my father flinch, my mother bow her head lower. I waited for it after every school play I was in and they weren't. I waited for it after every promise that was broken. I waited for it after my body was broken, fighting fires while they never once called. But I realize today I don't need an apology, because an apology can't undo a lifetime of being told you are second best. I took a deep breath, the words flowing from a place of deep, settled clarity. My silence allowed this to happen. My silence in the face of constant comparison. My silence in the face of manipulation. My silence in the face of being treated like a ghost in my own family. My silence was the oxygen that fed this toxicity. But that silence ends today. I turned to the judge. I am not asking for revenge. I am asking for justice. And more than that, I am asking for peace. My peace. Finally, I let my gaze fall upon my brother for the last time. He looked broken, a hollowed-out shell of the golden boy he once was. "Ethan," I said, and his head snapped up. "I forgive you." A gasp went through the courtroom. My mother looked up, a flicker of hope in her tear-filled eyes. I let the words hang in the air for a moment before I delivered the final liberating truth. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free from the weight of hating you." The gavel fell. Justice was served. But as I walked out of the cold courthouse into the weak afternoon sun, there was no elation, no victory lap, just a profound, hollow emptiness where a family used to be. The war was over, but now I had to learn how to live in the silence of peace. The gavel fell. Justice was served. Ethan was sentenced to prison and ordered to pay full restitution. Nexus Corp imploded in the scandal's aftermath. My parents, stripped of their son and their social standing, sold the glass house in Palo Alto and simply vanished. I never spoke to them again. But as I walked out of the cold courthouse into the weak afternoon sun, there was no elation, no victory lap, just a profound, hollow emptiness where a family used to be. The war was over, but now I had to learn how to live in the silence of peace. That silence was deafening at first, but slowly I began to fill it. Not with noise, but with purpose, with Julian's quiet, unwavering support, and the influx of new, passionate donors who believed in our mission. The Phoenix Initiative was reborn. We bought a large tract of land nestled in the Santa Cruz Mountains, a place of towering redwoods and the distant sound of the ocean. We built new cabins, a proper training facility, and a communal lodge. The work was hard, the days were long, but it was a good kind of tired. I found a new, quiet joy in watching a troubled teenager learn to tie a life-saving knot, or seeing the flicker of self-confidence in the eyes of a girl who'd been told she was worthless. I was teaching them how to survive in the wild, but what we were all really learning was how to survive ourselves. We were building a new kind of family, one bound not by blood, but by shared scars and a stubborn refusal to stay broken. One cool evening, about a year after the trial, Julian and I sat by a large, crackling campfire at the center's new grounds. The stars were brilliant in the clear mountain sky. We sat in comfortable silence for a long time, just watching the flames dance. He didn't offer any grand philosophical words about forgiveness or moving on. Instead, he picked up a small, smooth piece of driftwood from the pile beside him and handed it to me, along with a pocket knife. "Write their names," he said softly. "Write down the things that hurt you." I looked at him, confused. "And then," he continued, his gaze fixed on the fire, "you throw it in. Not to forget, not to erase, but to transform that energy. Let the fire turn it into light and warmth." My hand trembled slightly as I took the wood. I carefully carved the names that had been etched onto my soul for decades. Richard, Eleanor, Ethan. I held the piece of wood in my hand, feeling its weight. It was the weight of a broken promise, of 1,000 cutting remarks, of a lifetime of feeling invisible. It was so heavy. I took a deep, steadying breath and tossed it into the heart of the fire. The flames leaped up, consuming the wood in a brilliant flash of orange and gold, and I watched it burn until it was nothing but glowing, weightless embers rising into the night sky. I didn't cry. For the first time, I felt a lightness in my chest, a quiet, profound release. The story ends, or perhaps it begins, on a foggy morning on the California coast. I was leading a group of my kids on a hike along the bluffs of Wilder Ranch State Park, the gray mist swirling around us, the salty air clean and sharp. One of the newer girls, a tough 14-year-old named Maya, who hid her own deep wounds behind a cynical attitude, walked beside me. "Miss Anderson," she asked, her voice unexpectedly quiet, "are you still scared of fire?" I stopped and looked out at the vast gray expanse of the Pacific Ocean, the waves crashing rhythmically against the cliffs below. I thought of the roaring inferno of Eagle Creek, the cleansing fire in the hearth at the lodge, and the small transformative flame from the campfire. I smiled. Fire took a lot from me, I said, turning to look at her. But it also forged me. Fear never really goes away, Maya. It's a part of respect. But courage is the choice we make every single day, in spite of the fear. I put my arm around her shoulder, and we continued walking down the path. The greatest legacy we can leave behind isn't what we build, I told her, my voice as steady as the horizon. It's how we rise after we've been burned to the ground. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you could go back and tell your younger self, the one hurting in silence, one thing, what would it be? Share your wisdom below. Your words might be the lighthouse for someone lost in the fog. My story with that particular fire has ended, but the journey of healing is a continuous one for all of us. Thank you for walking this path with me, for listening, and for sharing your own strength in the comments. Your stories have been a beacon for me, just as I hope mine has been for you. If you found a piece of your own story here, please consider liking and subscribing. My name is Claire, and together we will continue to explore how we rise from the ashes. You are not alone.